Hey guys, Quiv the Lazy Geek here, and today we're going to talk about the cost of astrophotography as a hobby. Because yes, astrophotography is not a cheap hobby, at least that's how it appears. Now, if you're looking to get started into astrophotography, it's a very normal worry to have. How much is it going to cost me? And there is no easy answer to that. The easiest answer I can give you is at least around $500. The upper limit does not exist, and it will all depend on how crazy you get into astrophotography. The problem being, it is truly a black hole that you just keep falling into, and unfortunately you do not get the relativistic effects of time just coming to a standstill from the perspective of someone outside the black hole. So let's talk about, there's multiple ways to get into astrophotography. There's people coming from visual astronomy and deciding hey, let's have this telescope there, let's slap a camera on top of it. And that's the path that I took. And there's a second path, which is I'm not so interested in visual astronomy. I want to take nice astrophotography pictures, and they invest directly in a DSLR, that kind of stuff. Let's go in the second scenario. So the second scenario is, okay, you want to take Milky Way pictures. Very often it starts like that. So you want to take wide field Milky Way pictures. And what's great about that is that on a lot of photography forums, not specifically astrophotography forums, you have tons of tips and tricks about how to take Milky Way pictures. You'll hear about the 500 rules, the 500 rule or the 600 rule, or you might want to be a bit more conservative with those rules that basically tell you the maximum exposure time that you can get on your astrophotography images with the focal length that you're considering to take the pictures with. And you know, it can be quite amazing what you can get with just a DSLR, a decent lens, and a tripod. And if you get a cheap tripod, a cheap used DSLR that's fairly old, like the 60D from Canon, or you can choose whatever you want from Nikon or Canon, choose your poison, and a decent lens, typically a prime lens, and the 50mm f1.8 kind of nifty 50 type of lens makes a great starter lens. You can start buying everything like secondhand for $500, maybe even less. And with that, you can get amazing Milky Way pictures, especially if you take your equipment to travel to darker areas. You do not need a star tracker. You can get amazing stuff. And there is a YouTuber called Nebula Photos, a guy called Nico, awesome guy. I'll put a link up above to a video of his where he actually shows you how to take a picture of the Andromeda Nebula, maybe it was M42, I don't remember exactly, with just a camera and a tripod. And that's exactly how you can get started, and that, my friend, is a gateway drug to the wonderful world of losing money and throwing money out of the window into more and more and more astrophotography equipment, and you cannot stop until you've spent like more than a new car's worth of money into astrophotography equipment. Because okay, you've bought your DSLR, you've taken your nice Milky Way kind of pictures, you may even take a 200mm lens and put it on top, and still without a star tracker, you'll be getting decent pictures of the Andromeda galaxy or the Orion Nebula, but you want to get more, you want to get deeper, you want to get more details. And that's when you start hey, I want to take pictures of nebulae more. And so now you'll want to modify your camera and remove, there's a filter in most consumer cameras that basically blocks a very important wavelength that's in the deep red kind of spectrum. And you can pay someone to do it, or you can do it yourself, but very often it makes terrestrial photography, normal daytime photography, more difficult, so your camera will end up being specialized in astrophotography. And now that you've done that, where you're thinking I don't like when I'm at 200mm being limited to a couple of seconds of exposures before I see star trailing, so let's buy a star tracker. So you buy a star tracker, and the star tracker is something that basically will rotate at the same rate but in the opposite direction as the Earth's rotation, so that the stars stay still in your image. And you can take long exposure, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, several minutes of exposures with your DSLR, and then you can take many sessions such exposures and stack them, and to get much better signal to noise ratio. And so you're investing time, you're investing money, but surely star tracker and the removal of the filter on top of the DSLR, that's enough, right? Wrong. Because then you'll want to go deeper, so you'll want to have like a longer focal length. You'll want to buy an actual telescope like I have those here. And it's not over yet. Because, you know, a star tracker is all nice and good, but when you have a bigger focal length, when you're zooming in more, it gets more and more difficult to find your targets. So what better way to find targets than to invest into a go-to mount that can actually automatically point to targets. You can even have, like if you have a computer or a system that can do that, you can use something called plate solving. It will take a picture, look at the stars, identify exactly where it is pointed to, and then tell the mount, like a mount like this, to actually slew back, to point back to exactly the target that you want. You can frame things excellently. It's awesome, and it costs a lot of money. And then, you know, you have a go-to mount, you're at high focal length, but you realize that when you're taking exposures of 60 seconds or more, you're starting to start trailing again. You're like, why is that? And it's because you have mechanical inaccuracies within the mount itself or within your star tracker. And to basically work around those, you can do something called auto guiding, which is awesome. It's basically this little telescope that you see on top. Here is a telescope plus a camera that's connected, that will basically be talking to the mount to tell it like, hey, you're going a bit off track compared to the rotation of the Earth. You should go a bit slower or a bit faster in your rotation. And that's guiding, and that's a bit more money down the drain. And now you get decent pictures. You have a refracting telescope like this one. It's small, it's light. It has a focal length of maybe around 300 millimeters. You can take awesome pictures of nebulae and galaxies. But then you hear about planetary nebulae and smaller galaxies and all that kind of stuff. So you want to go deeper. You want to go for a bigger telescope like this one. And bigger telescopes, especially Newtonian telescopes like this one, are not super expensive. But you buy it, you try it, and it just is so that your mount cannot support such a big, heavy telescope. So you have to buy a new mount. And so you go from this little mount here to this bigger mount here that is more money, more expensive. And once you're done, you're like, okay, you're still using a DSLR there, and you're starting to have trouble because, you know, it's getting really annoying to take all of those bias frames and dark frames every single night because your DSLR cannot control its sensor temperature. So there you go. Let's buy an actual Astro Camera like this one. This is the ASI 1600 Cool from ZW. It's an amazing black and white monochrome camera, which means I actually have filters in front of it for red, green, and blue, and even other colors or other spectrums to get from my objects. So there we are, and this is not cheap, but you can cool the camera so you get much less noise in your image. You get much better images. You can get your dark frames and bias frames once, and then you don't need to take them ever again, or maybe every 6 months. Everything gets easier, more streamlined. It's so much better. But still, you know, you went from a DSLR to a cool Astro Camera, so you went with a color Astro Camera because this is what you are familiar with. And you'll be like, oh well, you know, I'm a bit in the city, because most of us are in the city, and you know, I want to take better images of nebulae. I see those people, they take amazing pictures of nebulae from Tokyo. And I want to do that as well. So you'll buy a filter like something, the Optolong L Enhance, and then after a few months the L Extreme will come out, and it will be even better from light polluted areas like Tokyo. So you buy that for your color camera, and you can take awesome pictures, and everything's so great. But then you realize that people with monochrome cameras, they keep telling you about how monochrome cameras are the master race, and they're so much better. So especially if you pair them with very tight bandpass narrowband filters, but you don't really have the money to invest in super tight bandpass narrowband filters. You will take cheaper narrowband filters along with a new monochrome camera, and with that monochrome camera and those narrowband filters, you'll get great pictures, but you'll be left wanting more out of your imaging time, because you're spending so much time imaging to get the same result in 20 hours that someone in your town gets in 3 hours, because they have even tighter narrowband filters, and narrowband filters are super expensive. So you will buy those super expensive filters, and each purchase I'm talking about here, we're talking about thousands of dollars, maybe less, but you know, the unit is $1,000 basically. And then you have the perfect equipment, but you are in the city and you want to be able to travel with it to get to darker areas and get better pictures. So you'll want to invest in a portable equipment, and it's coming around all the way like that. So this is in a very short time span basically the main story of most astrophotographers that you see on Facebook forums or cloudy nights, that kind of stuff, because they got trapped into the circle of new equipment. And me too. Look at this. I mean, come on. And my own path was very similar, coming from visual astronomy. At the time I was using a Meade ETX125 that I moved to a Meade LT6. The LT6, by the way, is hands down the best go-to telescope I ever used. It's no longer produced, and that's a shame. But anyway, I had bought a Sony Nex 5 camera, the very first Nex camera from Sony, and it was for pictures of my kid, and I decided to connect it to the telescope, and I got some results, and they were not great results, but they were results, and I was hooked. I was hooked, and you will be hooked as well. So you need to prepare for the addiction. Because then I bought a Meade DSi-2 monochrome camera, and I took my first pictures of the Orion Nebula. And then I bought a DSi-3 color camera, and I bought a go-to mount from Ioptron called the Smart EQ Pro. And I bought a telescope that was a 70mm ED type of doublet telescope. And with that, I took my first decent picture of a nebula, the M27 Dumbbell Nebula. And I went through a whole lot of iterations, including like a year ago. I basically sold all of my equipment because I was like, oh man, this hobby is just too intense. It's too crazy. I'm too much into the hobby. I'm too enthusiastic. I want to find a new hobby. I'm going to do paragliding. I'm going to fly in the sky, and this will replace this hobby. And it totally didn't, because now I have two hobbies and both are very expensive, and I am deep down in the hole of finances, and my CFO is not happy with me at all. And really, like in my years of doing the hobby, starting from when there were no CMOS cameras for astrophotography to now, really there are two things that changed my photography more than anything else. A few things, let's say. One is PixInsight. At the time, I didn't know how to use Photoshop. Photoshop was hard to use for astrophotography, at least for me. GIMP was still using only 8-bit images, and there was this piece of software called PixInsight. It's expensive, but man, is it worth it. I've been using it for years and years, and it beats probably any other piece of equipment that I ever bought. It was a life changer. And I bought things like the 1600 mm Cool. I bought one of the first versions of the camera. At the time, it had no USB ports like this. It had an SD4 auto guide port. It was the very first version. I was one of the very first buyers. It was amazing, and it changed how I did astrophotography. It changed everything. Something else really that really changed the way I see astrophotography is this mount, the Skywatcher EQ6R. It's basically a successor of the Orion Atlas and the EQ6 Pro, and that line of mounts really is kind of like the reference of astrophotography for like the widespread kind of equipment for deep sky astrophotography. And that really changed my life. I was going from very expensive mount to very expensive mounts from Vixen. Those mounts are amazing. I love them, and I regret selling them, but still this is cheaper, and it basically offers the same performance, even though it's less sleek. I have more tuning to do with that mount. Skywatcher mounts in general, you will have to tune them. I have guides on how to tune them above if you're interested, but it is something to keep in mind. So what drives this? What basically drives people to spend like a new car's worth of money, or even more, and sometimes much more depending on the person, to basically go down this drain? What is the attraction? What are the criteria? And basically the only thing is you want to take better pictures, and you want to go deeper, and you want to invest your time better. So if you want to get better pictures, you'll be looking at the star shapes. And if you want to enhance your star shapes, there's several things you can do. You can buy a new mount. You can buy a better auto guider. You can buy a better telescope that will be better corrected to have perfect star shapes across your field of view. And sometimes you'll want to go deeper, to zoom in more, to get more details, more resolution, more information in your images. And you'll get bigger telescopes for that, and you'll need to get a better mount for that. And it's all linked to getting more details. So there's like, better SNR, better details, better star shapes. All of this adds up. And then there's other things like you want to get easier processing. You want to get more automated sessions. You'll buy the software and the computer that comes with it. And this is a good idea because it allows you to be lazy. And maybe you'll want to go through to another area of astrophotography like I did, which is planetary astrophotography or solar astrophotography, because this has its own rewards. But besides the mount, it requires vastly different types of equipment. And so there you are again, down the rabbit hole. It all gets very, very tiring. So how can you avoid that? How can you avoid falling down this rabbit hole of expenses? The first thing is know what you want to achieve. So if you know that you will want to get like deep inside nebulae and to get a feel of whether you will want to do that, you'll want to look at Milky Way pictures, at nebula pictures, at planetary pictures online on forums and on Facebook, because that's super important. It gives you a feel of what people can achieve and whether you want to achieve the same as those people can achieve. And then you look at what equipment they use to achieve that, because that will basically drive how much you will be spending in the hobby. If you feel like Milky Way pictures are what you want to take, and maybe sometimes a nebula or two, then just your DSLR and your tripod without even tracker can work very well. But if you see that you actually want to take pictures of nebulae, you want to take very deep pictures of everything like nebulae, galaxies, all that kind of stuff like everyone does on forums, then one of the strategies is really buy once and never buy again. And that means a huge investment at first, but that would help likely not invest more in the future. One of the ways of doing that is basically buying what we call a premium mount from brands like in the US, like Astrophysics or 10 micron. I'm not sure, I think they're Italian, I'm not sure anymore, or that kind of stuff. So rather than a Skywatcher mount, a super premium mount that will have super good precision to start with, will be a joy to guide, everything will be easy, and that way you will never want to buy it again. Same for the telescope, a well-corrected telescope that will support maybe even a full-frame sensor, full-frame camera. And it will be super expensive, but you'll get good star shapes everywhere, and you will never need to buy that ever again. And then a cooled camera, which will be for example, you could take the 6200 mm Cool, which is, or mm Pro, sorry, which is a camera that is monochrome, cooled, and full frame camera. And you'll probably want some filters with that, and you'll need 2-inch filters, and you will want luminance red, green, and blue, but you also want narrowband filters maybe for nebulae if you are in the city. So that's going to be very expensive as well, especially if you go for the very narrowband filters. And then all of the equipment around it, all of the accessories, all of that, it really adds up. And of course, there's another option, is if you know you'll go down the rabbit hole, is to just not get into the hobby. Because otherwise you really are in for quite a ride, and it can get quite expensive. So if we go back to the first question in this video, is astrophotography expensive? And the answer is yes, yes it is. It can be extremely expensive, like completely crazily expensive. You will end up like, maybe there are people who end up spending as much money on equipment as it would to buy a new house and land in Tokyo. I'm not talking about the US where everything is cheap. So yeah, it can be as expensive as you want it to be, but it can also be very cheap. If you limit yourself to just a DSLR and a tripod and a lens, $500 is what you need. You might want to get a better DSLR. My own DSLR that I bought recently is a Pentax, because it features basically an integrated star tracker. It will move the sensor with the stars. And it's more expensive, but it's much more compact and can do a lot of things at once. That is basically the entry point, the gateway drug. Is it what you will stop with, or will you fall down the rabbit hole? This is completely up to you. But now you have been warned. This is all very expensive. Control yourself. It's really hard. Good luck. And with that, that's basically it for this video. You know, if you are new to this channel, if you're new to astrophotography or astronomy in general, you have been warned. And if you want to learn more about it, you're still wanting to go down that rabbit hole together, I have tons of videos about astrophotography and astronomy and tons of tips and tricks, including a series for beginners in astrophotography, which I'll be linking to here above. But really, you're in for quite a ride. And again, if you're new to this channel, if you like this kind of video, feel free to go down, click on the subscribe button, check all of the other videos that I have around, because I have tons of really practical videos to help you get better at astrophotography. Feel free to also click on that notification bell so you are notified when I post a new video. And you know, as always, feel free to leave a like down below, leave a comment, let me know what you think about it, let me know how much your equipment costs. That will be super interesting, and how much in total you have spent in astrophotography, because that is completely crazy. But you know, again, thank you so much for watching. Whenever you can, don't forget to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.